Dream big, plan smart, build wealth. This is the TFS podcast, where money talk gets real and financial freedom is more than just a goal. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of the TFS Wealthcast. And joining me today is our COO Sonali, financial planner at TFS. And we're going to take off where Pramu left off in the previous week's episode. So this is part 2 of mastering how to leverage your equity. Without any further ado, Sonali, thank you for joining me on this episode today.
Thanks, Rishi. Good to be here.
As always. So Sonali, let's jump straight into it, right? So I want to start by grounding this episode in where part 1 left off. Pramu gave us the execution playbook, how he thinks about equity, how to structure the loans, how the snowball effect builds property by property. What's the financial planner's perspective on all of that? What does Sonali Rodrigo see that Pramu Rodrigo doesn't always lead with?
Well, this is a point of conversation in a lot of our conversations, really, because his thing is to find an opportunity, assess it, and then basically say, oh, let's buy it, right? But for me, I look at it from a point of view, not can we do this? It's more like, should we do this, right? Because it has to kind of fit in with the overall investment objective. It has to fit in with the overall investment portfolio. So one of the main things, though, that Pram and I both agree on is being ready for opportunities to come by. So I think he touched on a couple of acquisitions in the early part of building our portfolio. One of the things that stood in good stead was that we had our equity already organized. So when an opportunity came by, we were ready to pounce on it. So we had to do the due diligence, we had to do the specific research on the property. However, we didn't have to run around trying to organize the finance and getting the equity access and all of that, because that was already ready. So that's something we both agreed on. So then when an opportunity came to our desk, we would look at it, go, should we do this? And if yes, we'll get into it straight away. So so I think from a financial planning point of view, I look at a few things which we've touched on previously as well. I want to make sure the cash flow is going to work, basically.
Yeah.
Whether we can afford it if something went wrong, if the interest rates went up, if there was a vacancy, like for investment property, like right now, our Footscray property is in between tenants. So it's currently advertised on market. We're looking at people are looking at it, we're getting applications. Now with some new tenancy laws that came into place, there's very limited information you can ask the tenant now.
Oh, okay.
So it's getting harder and harder for the landlord.
Yeah.
So
what kind of information can you not ask tenants?
My agent tells me you can't really ask previous employment history. And then I'm thinking, well, how can I not know where they used to work? Can I only ask where they work currently?
Yeah.
So because that makes it very hard to get
an idea of what kind of person you're getting
are
into
they
the house.
able to pay the rent, right? So it's actually in between tenants at the moment, but it's not really bothering me too much because I have factored in buffers for all these things, for vacancies.
Yeah.
So because if I hadn't, then I still have the mortgage to pay, and that I would be stressed right now.
Yeah.
So that's those are the things that we need to really look at from a practical point of view. Plus, obviously, rates are on the rise. So, I need to be able to afford the loan repayments, especially without a rent coming in.
Yeah.
So I usually put about 2 to 3% buffer and then see whether it's something we can still afford. We usually put about 70 to 80% vacancy. So that means if it wasn't rented for 20 to 30% of the time, can we still afford it? So as long as those sorts of parameters are ticked, then we say, let's go ahead and do it. So a little bit deeper level of analysis than what Pramu does from the number side of things is basically what I do.
Basically, you take the role of the planner in the task. So
well, yeah.
So you get stuck with a lot of paperwork, I assume?
Yeah, so well, putting a loan application is not that much fun because you have to, provide the lender with a lot of information
Yeah,
for them to approve a loan. So it takes a while. Yeah.
yeah,
So that's why, again, we have all of those things done and ready to go because otherwise these things can take time,
yeah.
4 weeks sometimes. So yeah.
So Sonali, on that topic, right? Could you share maybe a time where your planner's instinct stopped you guys from making a mistake in terms of buying an investment where Promo really wanted to buy it, but then you did the research and
I
you
think
saw.
last week he wanted to buy something.
Oh, okay.
Something we have for sale at the moment, I think, with sister property group. But it, it's not so much the research, it's just that we're in the middle of doing some other things.
Yeah,
So it really doesn't fit in with the overall yeah, basically strategy what we're doing right now.
yeah,
So I just flat out said no. So because that's actually it's a property that's being built. So from the type of property, I don't mind new properties because we get a lot of depreciation out of it.
yeah,
So that was fine. I was fine with the rental income, the area, all that sort of thing. But do we need to buy property in Victoria right now? Compared, when I look at our overall portfolio, do we need to um, have a loan right now while we're in the process of constructing another property and doing a couple more developments?
yeah.
No. So I just said no. We're not going to
And
do
there's
that.
more paperwork you get stuck with it.
Yes. So I'm actually in the middle of doing another loan. So
Yeah,
yeah, it would have just messed up all my plans there.
yeah.
So I was like, no, we're not doing that. So yeah, that was a very recent one
Where
last week.
was his property?
That was actually in the western suburbs
Oh,
of
okay.
Victoria.
Yeah. So, so now let's get into the foundational maths, right? I mean, financial planner. You come from your accounts background, your finance background. You love maths, I'm sure.
I do actually.
There we go. So let's get into the foundational maths, right? So you touched on it. Actually, Pramu touched on it, but I want you to break it down uh, in terms of the usable equity formula properly and walk us through a real example.
Okay.
Because I think people hear equity
Yeah.
and they imagine a big number that's fully accessible.
Yeah. So equity, in the simplest form, is the difference between the value of your property and the amount of debt you have against it. So, for example, let's say the value of your property is 1 million. And the debt you have against it is 600,000. You have 400,000 equity there. Now, usable equity is not 400,000. Usable equity means how much of that can you actually use. The banks are not going to lend you the 400,000 just like that.
Yeah.
They are going to lend you usually up to 80% of the value of the property without paying lender's mortgage insurance.
Yeah.
So in my example, if the value was 1 million, 80% of that is 800,000. If the debt against it is 600,000, you have 200,000 of usable equity that the bank will lend to you without you having to pay a lender's mortgage insurance.
Yeah.
Now, lender's mortgage insurance in itself is not a bad thing. I think Pramod touched on his episode as well. We've paid LMI. I
Yeah,
don't have a problem with LMI.
He
per
mentioned
se.
you guys have sometimes gone into the territory of LMI to buy a
Yes.
property, right?
Yeah. So you make the decision based on, okay, can I access more money from the bank by paying a little bit more of a premium, lender's mortgage insurance, and still have that money work really hard. It depends on what you're investing it into, right? So
Yeah.
you have to do the numbers and see whether it's a worthwhile exercise. I must say though, for some professions like say doctors, accountants, lawyers, most of the banks waive off the LMI, so you can borrow up to 90%. So
Okay.
there's that. So
Yeah.
it depends on the profession, depends on the person. So we can, have clients borrowing up to 90% without paying LMI. So
Yeah.
I love that because that way you can use, so the usable equity goes up. So if you're able to borrow up to 90%, in my example, you have the lender happy to lend you up to 900,000. Then if your loan is 600,000, you have 300,000 in usable equity, which you
Yeah.
can do a hell of a lot more than the 200,000,
Yeah.
right? So depending on your scenario, yeah, that's how you calculate basically equity versus usable equity. Usable equity is what you can use instead of saving money from scratch like you did for your first home. Once the property values go up in value and you do accumulate some equity, you can use that for your next investment property as opposed to saving money from scratch. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow, and you did all that maths just like that in your head.
that's easy maths. Vijay.
Right. So, so what do you think stops people from knowing that they have this available to them?
They just lack of knowledge most of the time.
Yeah.
And they're vaguely aware of this concept of equity, but they're not really sure how to go about using it.
Yeah.
A lot of people, you'll be surprised, think that if they want to buy an investment property, they have to do the same thing that they did for their first home and save up a deposit from scratch.
Yeah.
Right. So, it surprises me with all of the info and the things that you see out there.
All the property gurus
Yeah,
online.
some people don't know that still.
Yeah.
And to be fair, like if you ask me an IT related question, some of the basic stuff, some I might not know because it's just not my, territory,
Yeah.
basically. So I get why people are, some people don't like talking about finance. They don't like looking into it. Their eyes glaze over. So, yeah. So a lot of people don't know equity is accessible and you can use it towards an investment property. Yeah, I think that's why most people don't really use it. They
And
just
I
sit
guess
on
so we've heard this from some clients. They say, oh, I don't want to refinance my home loan to access equity. You just get me on another 30-year loan, as if it's a bad thing. What do you have to say to clients like that?
there are pros and cons. It depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
So part of what, if a client says that, that's true. So if you've taken a 30-year loan term and you've paid down your debt for, let's say, 3 years, your remaining loan term is 27 years. When you refinance, some brokers would extend the loan term again to the 30 years.
Yeah.
That means overall, if you look at it, you would end up paying 33 years worth of interest.
Yeah.
So that in itself is a bad thing because why would you pay extra to the bank,
Yeah.
right? Having said that, though, there are ways to structure it. You can even go to the new bank with a 27-year loan term if you want to.
Yeah.
There are some clients who will be like, I'm not planning on having this property for 30 years. I just want to do what I need to do, but still keep my repayments affordable. Then you would extend it to 30 years. There are various instances we would extend it for 30 years, not for everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just a blanket statement, it can be correct, it can be incorrect depending on the client situation. Refinancing to access equity, you could stay with your same bank and access equity as a top-up loan.
Yeah.
You can refinance for better. So it shouldn't just be to access equity that you refinance. It should be a better rate. It should, there are a variety of things you need to look at before you do that.
So that's good. So what are some things clients should look at, right, before they refinance, or if they're considering a refinance before they go ahead with the lender? What are some things that you recommend they should look at?
You need to be careful not to get your loan contaminated. What I mean by that is a lot of customers, because they don't know or they don't articulate their requirements and objectives to the broker or bank, they would just go and say, oh, I want to top up on my loan. Majority of the time, then the banker would just do a top up on their loan. So let's say you have a 400,000 loan and you have ability to top it up by 150, which the client is planning on using for an investment. The banker or the broker can increase their loan to 550.
Yeah.
However, they've done it in one split. So it's one whole pot. Now, your 400,000 might have been for your own occupied property. And then the 150 you took might have been earmarked for investment. However, you have it all mixed in one. That's a contaminated loan because it's very hard to differentiate between tax deductible debt and non-tax deductible debt.
Okay.
I'll back up a minute there. When you have your own occupied property, the interest on that is not tax deductible because it's obviously you're living in it. It's not used for income producing purposes.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a loan that you took for an investment property, you're generating rental income, and it is agreed by the ATO that the interest on that is tax deductible. So that's a difference between non-tax deductible interest and tax
Tax
deductible
deductible.
interest.
Yeah.
Now, when you have the loan in one, the problem is it's very hard to figure out what's what and how much of it is deductible and how much
Yeah.
is not. So I see a lot of people do this mistake. They just put it all in one, and then when it comes to tax time, they just take the loan statement, and that has part non-tax deductible and part deductible. So
Yeah.
that's quite confusing, and then you might lose out on deductions that you could have had. How you probably should look at structuring. I mean, this is how we do it. Again, this is not a recommendation, so everything we have to look at
Yeah.
properly for your own personal circumstances.
But guys, if you do need a financial planner, this lady right here, she's a financial planner, provided you can afford her.
Yeah, so this is general advice only, and I'm saying what I've done for myself. So we would have a separate split, so that way you can identify clearly what is earmarked for investment, and then the interest on that is easily identifiable at the end of the year as well. Typically it's a separate loan statement that you have for that, and it's very clean, and then the accountant basically has a very easy time of it. So you would, if you're doing several top ups or whatever, you might even have couple of splits. So then, like personally, I have one split that might say Footscray property. I have
Yeah.
another split that says Alfredton property, like that.
Yeah.
So that way I know what's what as well. When I log into my internet banking, it's very easy for me to see. So, and then at tax time, it's very easy. Get the statement and give it to the accountant. He knows what's what and against which property this should be deductible. So that's something you probably should think about if you are going to access equity, how you structure the loan. Yeah.
Awesome. So guys like me, if there was a lot of information to digest, you might want to rewind and listen to that again, because there was a lot of valuable information, right? So Sonali, on the same topic of accessing equity, right? Last week Pramu mentioned some of the reasons people access their equity. It's for a cash out refinance. They do a separate equity split, and also sometimes for a line of credit, right? Now, as a financial planner, which do you recommend and to who?
I am not recommending anything.
Okay.
I will talk through the differences of each, right? So like I said, if you do a cash out refinance and you just do one loan, it can get contaminated, right? So it's easy. It's very easy for people to understand this. You have just the one loan to manage and the repayments of one loan to manage. So while it's easy, like I said, it can mean you might miss out on certain deductions because it's just too hard to identify what's what. A separate split is usually what we tend to do for a lot of our customers, and what I've done for myself as well. That's easy to identify what's used for which property, and it's very clean and clear. Line of credit, yes, it's an option, but it can tend to be a little bit more expensive than having a separate investment split. So we usually tend not to do that for a lot of customers, merely because it's quite expensive and there's better ways to do things. So those are the kind of differences between those three options. But people do all three. I've seen all three.
So Sonali, you mentioned contaminated loans twice now. So can we go deep on that? What exactly happens, and how does it happen, and what does it cost someone?
Yeah. So in the previous example, I said, so if you have a home loan for 400,000 and that is your owner occupied home loan, the interest on that is not tax deductible. So if you say top up the loan and they've increased that loan to say 550 and you have an extra 150 available, and that you want to use towards an investment property, the interest on that should be tax deductible, but it's a little hard to figure it out. Then you have to do pro rata interest and all that sort of stuff, right? So that in itself is contaminated. What I see a lot of people doing is they'll say, okay, take 150 out for investment, and then they'll spend 130 on an investment property, use 20 to buy a car. That again is now a personal expense,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So now it's further contaminated. So all in that one loan, right? So it gets really difficult to get. And then there's interest that gets calculated daily, charged monthly. So it all depends on when you bought the thing and
Yeah.
all of that. And then the original intention was to use it towards an investment, but then in the middle you've changed the numbers again as well. So it's very hard. And then the ATO obviously would take a very conservative position on all of that, and they'll
So people who do this really
probably disallow some of the deductions,
Yeah.
right? So you don't want to get into that. So it's very also important to remember it's hard to kind of fix these things up after the fact. So you're better off getting proper advice before you do anything. So the best time to get advice is obviously when you buy your first home, you have the owner occupied debt. When you're thinking of an investment, get professional advice how to structure the loan correctly so that you don't have to kind of try and fix all these things up later down the track and become a real headache for your accountant.
And if you want professional advice and you want a tailored strategy that works for you, talk to TFS.
Doing a plugin, yes.
So, all right. Let's talk about your risk framework, Sonali. Before you sign off on any equity release, before you and Pramu do it personally, or before you advise a client, what tests do you apply? You mentioned a 4-test model previously. Can you
For us personally, I do a kind of a 4-test model. It's not, written in stone, but obviously the first one is the serviceability check. Whether we can, we look at the income and then the expenses and all other debts that we have, and taking on this debt, can I afford it? If the bank interest rates go up, can I afford it? And then like sometimes that's another thing that customers mix up. Borrowing capacity is not the same as being able to service a loan, right? Borrowing capacity is what the bank is willing to lend you. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should go and borrow that amount, because you might not be able to comfortably afford that. The banks anyway do their stress testing, usually 3% above the current rate. They will do a buffer and check whether you can repay. However, that's their way of looking at it. That might not work for you. You might have things planned. You might have, say if you're having a baby and you're taking time off, then a 2-income household can become a 1-income household. At that time, maybe you shouldn't think of taking on more debt.
Or having a baby.
Well, I have two. So, so you have to work through things like that. The bank might not know in 6 months that you're thinking of having a baby, so they'll be fine to lend you, right?
Sometimes even they might not know that they're thinking of having a baby.
Well,
so my father told me, but
so you have to kind of work it through and see what you're comfortable with. So that's one of the tests that I typically do. Then the stress test is another thing that I do. Now that's a little bit more okay. So personally, I think about, okay, if it's 2-income household, if one person is unable to work, what will happen? Do I have a cash buffer that I've saved up for emergencies? Now, this is something that goes towards the financial planning territory, but I'll still talk about it. So usually we get.
I mean, you're a financial planner, qualified financial planner, so you're the only one who can talk about
it. Well, true, but I like to sit down 101 and then talk about the personal financial plans, not so much in general.
So if anyone wants a financial planner, you should speak to us and see if Sonali is available.
So first thing I look at is, do I have an emergency buffer, about 3 to 6 months of emergency funds saved up? That means, am I able to cover all my repayments, my expenses, my mortgages, everything? 3 to 6 months saved up. I usually then, because we've got quite a few properties in our portfolio, have the numbers done so that, okay, I've got the rent coming in. How much cash am I out of pocket? I have insurances to cover it. It's personal insurances. So things like income protection. So if I wasn't able to work, that would pay me almost like a salary. Right? So those things are all set up so that I have peace of mind knowing that I've got the whole portfolio is there. It's not going to come falling down like
Yeah.
a deck of cards if either of us are unable to work. Now, because we do business, we have a little bit more leeway. If it was a PAYG customer, and if you can't go to work, you'll use up your sick leave and annual leave, and that's it.
Yeah.
Then you'll be on no pay leave, right? So
Yeah.
you have to then see what cushioning do I have and safety nets do I have. So that's where insurance plays a large role when we do planning, because income protection is something that we usually do for especially younger couples and families
Yeah.
and things like that, because that way you have your emergency buffer covering you, and then the income protection can kick in if you're
Yeah.
unable to work, so that then all your other overall investment and portfolio goals and things won't get impacted
Yeah.
by one person not being able to work. So that's that. And then we also look at the actual property and the cash flow. What's the rent coming in? What are the expenses? How much will the agent charge? The insurance, the body corp, if there's any things like that. Now, I see a lot of investment, almost gurus talk about things like after tax cash flow. After tax, this is only going to cost you the cost of a cup of coffee, sort of
Yeah.
thing. Sometimes they factor in things like the tax deductions and depreciations into that. So that you will get after you do your tax returns and all of that. So there'll be a timing issue there,
Yeah.
right?
You
So
can't get it immediately.
you can't get
yes.
it immediately. Yes, on like second, third year onwards, you can do like PAYG variations and things like that, which I won't get into. But you have to see what's the mortgage repayment, what's the rent coming in, and can I afford the out of pocket for all the other bills that will
Yeah.
come in, right? Because otherwise, you're going to be short on cash because you're expected to pay those bills and front up the cash for the mortgage. So you have to, understand how the cash flow works and the timing of it as
Yeah.
well. So that's very important. Overall, yes, the property might be very good on paper, but you have to see how the timing works as well, because your budget has to be, in line with that, right? And then, of course, like I talked about before, the buffers,
The buffer check.
3 to 6 months of expenses.
3 to 6 months. Okay.
3 to 6 months, I usually say. 3 if it's like a dual income sort of, family, stable jobs, nothing too risky to think about.
Yeah.
But 6 months if it's like a one person. So because, if one person is out of work, then the other person is not working, then that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So it depends on your personal situation, but 3 to 6 months is the usual sort of,
Okay.
good place to start.
Yeah. So, to ask a question, right? Now, you said if young couples, they can get insurance if one person was to go out of work, where the insurance covers the repayments. Is there an insurance like that where if a couple breaks up, is there an insurance like that, Sonali? This is off topic. I just want to know. No, there's no insurance as a financial planner.
Break up?
Yeah.
What? Breakup insurance? What?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, look, there are couples who bought properties together. They break up, and then
what?
What happens to their property portfolio? They have to split it.
Usually, if they're a couple and they buy a property together, we've had this before.
Yeah.
We kind of make sure that they have some sort of an agreement on if they break up, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So we actually quite a few times, you'll be surprised how many times I've seen this now. So then they have an agreement on when they would sort of sell, and if they're selling, they would offer it to each other first. If they're able to buy it, then they'll buy it. If not, they'll put it to market. How would it's kind of like an agreement that they, some clients actually go to a lawyer and sign it.
Okay.
Some just have had that conversation. It's easier for us to have that conversation as a financial planner with them because I'm an impartial third party. I'm the one bringing it up. So then it's easier rather than, a couple going, oh, what if we break up? It's a bit of a hard conversation, but we do that. So I don't think there's insurance, but then we try and sort of.
There are steps you can take to
mitigate that.
To ensure that it's fair play for both parties.
Yes, correct. But even then, of course, couples fight. And then at the end, after, or if they separate, then it's sometimes.
So any couples listening, there's always the what if possibility. And if you've got a lot of investment properties, you might want to speak to a financial planner. I'm just saying. So with that being said, so now let's move on to the
lawyer mostly because you have to put things in place. Well, that becomes like a prenup almost then. Yeah.
So have there been times where clients has passed three tests and failed the fourth?
Sometimes, but it depends on their situation, right? So some clients, they don't pass any test, but they still want to do it,
Okay.
right? So there's only so much we can sort of outline to them. It's
Yeah.
their decision at the end of the day. And then sometimes clients, have backups in their head. Like we see a lot of Sri Lankan customers who have property overseas and things like
Okay.
that. So,
Yeah.
then in their head, of worst case scenario, I'll sell that.
Sell that.
Those
Yeah.
sorts of things do come into play. So yes, then in their head, it's not a risky move. So yeah,
Also, they've got their own buffers.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might not look like your traditional money in the bank sort of
Yeah.
buffers, but yeah. So as long as whatever the client is comfortable with, right? So if they feel like that's okay, what we can do is counsel them and tell them these are the sorts of things you
Yeah.
need to look up for, right? So yeah.
All right. So now, since we've been going deep, let's go deeper on stress testing specifically, right?
Mhm.
So when you're modeling a portfolio with multiple properties and additional debt, what scenarios do you actually run? What does a proper stress test look like?
So I think I touched on before as well. So the bank stress test at about 3%.
Okay.
I also try to kind of do similar, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
For the interest rate. So rate rises, right? So you check what it is. Sometimes we see customers going, okay, I don't want to really take the risk. I'm just going to fix it, right? So I think early on, Pramod mentioned we fixed a lot of our investment property
Yeah.
rates. We got really good rates because it was COVID level rates. So why
Okay.
not
Yeah.
fix it? So we had it fixed, I think, for about 3 years. So then I didn't even have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So if I was comfortable with that level, and then for the next 3 years, this is what I'm going to pay, then that's a good way to mitigate this
Yeah.
interest rate changes by fixing it, right? So we did that quite a bit. And then another thing we need to check on is the vacancy. Vacancy means if you have an investment property for rent, and if it's available for rent, how quickly will it get tenanted? So, like I said, currently the Footscray property, it's not tenanted. So
Yeah.
it hasn't been, I think they moved out about 3 weeks ago. So
Yeah.
I've not had about 3 weeks worth of
Rental
rent
income.
coming in.
Yeah.
So now it's vacant, right? So am I able to afford that? Is something that I usually check and see. If there's no money coming in, do I have enough leeway in my budget to be able to sort of pump money in? Because the
Yeah.
mortgage doesn't stop just because your tenant
House is
moved
not
out,
tenanted.
right?
Yeah.
So that's something that you really need to look at. You also can see what the sort of vacancy rates are in the suburbs. So, like, there might be areas where there are a lot of owner occupiers living and not too many properties for rent.
Yeah.
So then the vacancy rates would be very low there because people are fighting over each other to get in there. But there might be other areas where the vacancy rates are quite high because there are a lot of properties to rent in
Yeah.
that area. So depending on where you're buying, that test can vary as well, right? So just be mindful of that. It's not
Okay.
a standard sort of rate that you can
Yeah.
put, because it depends on where you're buying as well. So yeah, those are sort of the two stress tests that I do. And of course, like the income, if one person was not able to work, what happens? And then, like I said, for that I do have quite a few buffers going, and with a lot of my planning clients, that's what we do as well.
Yeah.
So it I think the takeaway from this is you have to see what can go wrong and how you can mitigate all of that,
Yeah.
right? As much as you can before you get into these things, because just going in willy-nilly without a plan is a recipe for disaster, because things go wrong. Like, these are not even things that, like, rates rising, we're seeing it happening. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
It's happening right now.
It's happening right
Yeah.
now. Vacancy rates happens all the time, right? Properties are vacant and sit vacant for
Yeah.
a lot of the time, depending on what's going on and the area. And then income disruption. You might get sick and can't go to work. That happens.
Yeah.
These are not far fetched.
And the properties being vacant, it also depends on if the owners are being realistic with the kind of rental income they can
That is also
get
true.
for that property.
That's true. So
right?
if that's what I'm thinking. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking to ask my agent, should I reduce the price?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, okay, even a $10 reduction per week, that's going to cost me for the year like $520.
Yeah.
But then if it sits vacant for 1 week extra, that's going to, cost me
you
more than that.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense for me to reduce the price
Yeah.
and get a tenant in. So you have to be realistic like that and not be like, oh, I'm never going to rent this until I get this price.
Yeah.
Right? So we do see a lot of landlords sometimes being a little unrealistic. So I think it's up to the agents as well to kind of
to educate the landlords, yeah.
them and be like, okay, this is what we're seeing in the area. But in this case, I'm trying to reduce the rent, and my agent's like, no, this is what we can get. So anyway, I'll probably reduce.
Yeah,
it.
I mean that's something we see with agents. Some agents, even though the owner of the property is the one that's putting money in the agent's pocket, the agents take the side of the tenants and go against the
We've
owner,
seen that quite
right? And vice versa. So I guess it's about finding that
Balance.
middle ground.
Yeah.
Anyways, so since you mentioned cash buffers a few times, Sonali, let's make this really concrete. What's your non-negotiable rule on cash reserves before using equity? Is it always 3 to 6 months, or
It's minimum 3 months.
Yeah.
I don't think you should go below that.
below that? Okay.
Yeah, because see, say for income protection, we usually go with a waiting period of about 30 to 60 days. I won't get into too much detail,
Yeah.
but for that sort of thing to work, then to have continuous income, I need like 3 months emergency buffer, and then the income protection kicks in. So that'll take me up in some cases, if you're not able to work for the rest of your life, until your retirement
Yeah.
age, right? So so then I feel like in my head I've got every angle covered there. So 3 months is, I think, the optimal level for me to
Okay.
as a minimum.
Yeah.
Right. But like I said, if it's a one income household, it should be a bit more. And if you can have more than that, by all means,
Yeah.
right? But bare minimum, you should have that before you start venturing out into a bit more adventurous stuff like investment properties, right?
Yeah.
So without proper backups and safety nets, I don't think you
Yeah.
should do any of this, really.
Basically in anything in life, right?
Yeah,
So-
correct. Right. So you should have a plan for risk mitigation.
Yeah.
I mean, very risk averse, as you can see.
Now, if you're someone who's bad at planning, I mean, you need to speak to a qualified financial planner. If you don't know anyone, we have someone in TFS, guy. Right?
Oh, cringe.
Look, even if you want to pay and get a financial planner, it really depends on Sonali's schedule. She's very particular.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to sit here and spend an hour convincing why people should. I want to work with motivated clients.
There you go.
I mean, yeah.
So even if you can afford it, doesn't guarantee you a slot. Anyways, so Sonali, what are the biggest mistakes you see people making when it comes to leveraging equity? I mean, not the technical stuff we've covered, but the behavioral and structural mistakes that people make in practice.
Oh, I've seen a lot of structural mistakes. I can tell you that. I think, the contaminated loans. It's just like, why would anyone set it up like this?
Yeah.
It
So it also
just
comes
doesn't
down
make sense.
to whoever did it not having
Correct.
the
Because
right
a lot
education.
of the time, customers wouldn't know, clients wouldn't know these things.
Yeah.
It's not, their day to day thing to do. So unless you really dive deep into, research and all of that, you
Yeah.
wouldn't know about loan structures, right? So it's up to the person that they go to be able to educate them and do it correctly, right? So we've seen a lot of contaminated loans where own occupied personal sort of purposes mixed with investment purposes. So it's very hard to differentiate the tax deductibility of that interest. I've also seen securities that have been cross-collateralized, which is another thing that I absolutely don't like, because I think that happens with a lot of the banks if you go to one particular bank, you have your own occupied and a couple of investment properties there. They mix all of that securities and lend against it, which in itself is not a bad thing. But the problem is when they have crossed all the securities, when untangling that is a problem. So if you want to sell it at one point, they look at the overall LVR and sometimes go, okay, from the sale proceeds, you need to reduce the balances for the other ones.
Yeah.
Right. So then they kind of control the sales proceeds as well. So it becomes a problem then. So there's a particular major bank that's a real culprit. They do this all the time. They don't even tell the customer this.
Yeah.
It's when you go to sell one that you find out, oh, the whole thing is crossed and it's
is it one of the big four?
Yes, it is. So yeah, and they don't even let the customer know. They just do it. But then that's why, so sometimes we talk to the customers and go, let's not go to one particular lender. You should probably look at diversifying, because otherwise they have like the whole picture and they can go and do these things in without even you knowing, right? So that's one way to go diversify your lender base so that you don't get into this. But again, you can tell the banks not to cross. You want a standalone security so that you can decide on that particular security. If you want to sell it, you sell it, and then that money can be used whatever way you want without it impacting anything or having to reduce the debts on the other ones.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of cross-collateralized securities. And then I think some people are over leveraged, let's just face it, right? So they haven't done their buffer testing or cash flow or whatever.
Yeah.
They've just got the maximum that the bank would lend them and now they can't afford it.
Yeah, they've seen equity and gone, ooh, free money, but
yeah,
it's not free money. Exactly.
You need to be very careful how you use it. Otherwise, you can go backwards in your financial position by accessing equity, right? So basically, when you access equity, you pay a certain interest rate. What you need to do is make sure that you put it towards something that you get a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So with the tax deductions, then you're in a better position and you can create wealth. That's the point of it. But if you're going to access and do other random things with it, then you're going backwards, really.
Yeah.
So then you shouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
On that, Sonali, okay, now, first time property investors, when they're looking to buy an investment property by accessing the equity in their own occupied home, a lot of people want to look for positively geared properties whereby the rental income is more than the mortgage repayment. Now, realistically, in this current market, wherein it's hard to find positively geared properties like that. So, what do you have to say to investors like that who are just looking for properties that will give them more rental income than their annual mortgage?
Like you said, it's hard to find in this market because the rates are high.
Yeah.
Right? When the rates were lower, a lot of our properties were positively geared. But now that the rates are higher, now it's either breaking even or I have to put a little bit out of pocket. So what I put out of pocket, yes, it is tax deductible. But at the end of the day, personally for me, property needs to be something that appreciates in value and gives me capital growth over the longer term.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, income coming in, holding cost, minimal holding cost is a plus. So by all means, try and get it to as positively geared as possible. But that is not the only thing I look at.
Exactly. That's what I want.
Yeah, because just the income itself, you can maybe invest in something else and get that.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to look at what it will give you in the long term, because you are taking on a significant debt, a significant risk by doing it. So it should at least, give you capital growth over the long term, not just the income. So what are you then getting out of it? Because it kind of, pays the mortgage, and then what? And then you sell it and it's the same price. So sometimes we've seen it going down as well.
Yeah.
So you have nothing to show for it, right?
Yeah.
So you have to look at what the capital growth opportunities are, I think. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they don't know that there are tax depreciations involved.
No. But again, that's a dangerous thing as well, because there are sometimes people just talk about the tax benefits of investing in property.
Yeah.
That should not be your sole reason for doing it at
Yeah.
all. Capital growth, holding costs being fairly minimal, and tax deductions is my reason for doing it.
Yeah.
So um, we have favored new properties because we get more tax deductions from it.
Yeah.
And because we are sort of able to get some opportunities that are off market, and a lot of our property purchases have been from nomination sales and off market opportunities. So so it shouldn't just be about one thing. It should be, like I said, capital growth, holding costs being minimal, as well as tax depreciation. So depreciation is one thing a lot of property investors don't know. So what you should do is get a depreciation report, and then you can give it to your accountant and they'll do the rest for you. So you get to deduct, basically write off certain things in the property over the course of the life of that whatever. So like, say for example, an oven might be written off over a 5-year period. So then you get to claim that in your tax. So not a lot of people know about it, but that's a plus point. That's a benefit.
So I want to touch on one word that we mentioned a few times in the past few minutes. Cross-collateralisation. Right? So it's a financial strategy that you mentioned that a lot of people use, but they don't know how to use it right. Right? So let's give it the full treatment, Sonali. I don't know who better than you or Pramod to explain this to us.
It's not my favorite thing to do, but there are instances where we kind of do it to avoid things like lender's mortgage insurance. So I'll explain. So in one of my previous exams, we talked about a property worth $1 million, and then we had a loan of 600,000. So that LVR would end up being 60% LVR when you take those numbers. Now let's assume that we had another property that was worth another $1 million for ease of calculation, and then that one had an LVR of 90%, meaning a 900,000 loan against it, right? If you take the value of those two properties together, that's 2 million, right? Then the loans, one has 600, another one has 900. So the total of the loans would be 1.5 million. Now then, the LVR, if you look at the overall LVR, which is 2 million valued properties against $1.5 million loans, the overall LVR would be 75%, which is under 80%. Under 80%. Right? So let's say we were refinancing, for argument's sake. Loan 1 had a 60% LVR, property 1. Property 2 had a 90% LVR. We wouldn't pay LMI on the 60% one, but we would have to pay LMI on the 90% one. So to avoid that, a lot of the bankers would cross the two securities together, add the two loans together, and be at the 75% LVR, thereby avoiding lender's mortgage insurance. Which is why a lot of people do it, right? Which is not a bad thing in itself. But what you need to be careful of is that now it's crossed. If you were to get rid of one of the properties, let's say you were going to get rid of the one that had 60% LVR, then the lender would be left with a property that is worth $1 million and has a loan of 900,000 against it. They'll be like, no, we don't like that. If you told us that you were wanting a 90% lend, we wouldn't have lent to you. Reduce this to 80 now. So from those sales proceeds, they can be like, okay, we want you to pay money and reduce this loan. To 800,000. For us to be able to continue to, let you have that loan, right? So then they kind of dictate what to do with the sales proceeds as well. So because of those sorts of things, we tend to avoid, but in this sort of scenario, to avoid LMI, sometimes we do it, right? But then, so it's on a case-by-case basis. It can work, but typically, if we can avoid it, we try to avoid it. So let's say I didn't have a loan of 900,000 here, I had 800,000. Then I had 60% LVR and 80% LVR. I don't need to cross it then. we would do two applications at two separate loans, right? Sometimes brokers and bankers can't be bothered to do two applications. They'll do the one with everything in there.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah.
they're like, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
But it's usually people sometimes don't know what they want to do 2 years down
Yeah,
the track, right? Sometimes. So then it's best to have it standalone if you can have it standalone.
So,
Yeah.
so okay, to clients, potential clients or clients who are listening, who probably have their loans cross-collateralized by a broker, right? But they're not sure. What should they do?
Okay, so with some of the banks, not all the banks, they would list the security on the loan statement, right? So the security that is used would be there, and the address would be there. So if it's crossed, it will have more than one address there.
Yeah.
On that loan statement, right? Underneath this section where it says security. If you look at your loan documentation, same thing. Under security, it should have the address. If it has only one address, chances are it's not crossed. If it has a couple of addresses, that means they're all crossed. But that alone is not enough. Some banks don't put that on their statement. So you might have to call the bank and check, or call your broker and check what's been done. But yeah, if you can untangle it, it's good to untangle it. So I think we've helped a lot of customers untangle it and make sure it's all, refinancing can be a nightmare when it's crossed as well.
Yeah.
So you can't refinance one, you have to refinance the whole thing. If you're going to two different banks, then it has to be done on the same day, and like a whole,
So guys, if your loans are all tangled and you want to get them untangled, you should speak to a team like TFS.
Good at untangling.
Who's good at untangling, right? All right, Sonali. So this has been a good episode. So we're down to the last question. And I can see your face that you're happy, like, oh, it's the last question. Finally, I can. So, and I want this to be actionable as one with how Pramu ended part one of this series, right? So, to someone who's listening right now, if they own their home and they've got equity, part one and part two of this series have genuinely resonated with them, and they're ready to take the next step. What is one thing they should do this week?
If they don't,
To reiterate, I think I mixed up my question here. So to anyone who's listened to this episode part two, and they listen to part one, right? And
I know they're all ready to.
And now they're all ready. Exactly. They've got a property, they've got equity, and they're ready to pull the trigger.
I can buy the whole world. Okay. Just please speak to someone who knows what they're doing, please. Because, like I said, if it's very hard to fix it down the track once you've done the wrong thing. If you haven't done anything, that's the best place to start. Speak to somebody, do the numbers. So first, have a look at, obviously, what is usable equity. We talked about what usable equity was. So then if you speak to a professional, they would most likely organize a valuation on your current property. Sometimes clients tell us that my property is worth this much, but it's not.
Yeah.
The bank will only take what their valuer says it's worth. And then looking at your loan to see what the usable equity is. Then we'll do a serviceability assessment. Can you actually access that equity? Will the bank lend that to you? Right? Just because usable equity is there doesn't mean the bank will lend it to you. You have to be able to service that portion. Right? So then you can get the professional to do a serviceability assessment to see if that works. Third would be loan structure. You have to make sure it's structured correctly. Like I said, don't get it contaminated with your existing home loan. Have a separate split or the way you want to structure it. Sometimes we do interest only. I think Pramod touched on it in his previous episode, where for investments, personally, we've done investment interest only. Right? So because I want to put as much of my money as possible towards my non-tax deductible debt and pay that off before I start paying off my investment properties, right? Plus it's tax deductible, so why not? So do that, and then you can, once you do all of that, again, one of my main things is being prepared. So if you have usable equity, you have servicing capacity, and you know the structure, put the loan application through and then get it ready. You can park it in your investment split, like Pramod spoke of before, so that when an opportunity comes by, then you can run the cash flow on that particular opportunity, see if it works for you, and then press go on that. So, yeah, that's what they should do.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Sonali. And for guys who've tuned in to part two, this episode, who have not yet checked out part one, you might want to check it out, because in this series, Pramu and Sonali shared with us how to master leveraging your equity, right? So Pramu spoke on how they did it, what you need to do, things you need to look at, and Sonali touched specifically on how to mitigate the risks involved in leveraging your equity. So that was a wealth of knowledge in both these episodes. So when you do have time, do check it out, and you might need to watch it more than one, listen to it more than once to really absorb the knowledge that's been shared here.
One thing again to remind, this is not specific advice. You need to make sure you speak to somebody who knows what they're doing for your particular circumstances, because they can see the overall picture. Yeah. Right? I'm just saying, based on my experience and what we did for ourselves, it might not suit whoever was listening. So we need to make sure that it's tailored to their particular circumstances. So if you don't come talk to us, whoever you talk to, just make sure that they do it for you. Don't just say, this is what it should be done. It might not work for you.
Yeah. You don't need to speak to anyone else. Speak to TFS. We'll give you a tailored financial strategy. So with that being said, see you guys on the next episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the TFS podcast, where we turn knowledge into action and big goals into real results. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe and share this episode with someone working towards their next financial step. Now, with that being said, until next time, keep building.